has confirmed it's launched an attack on Iran.
At 1400 local time, under the hazy heat of the Persian Gulf, a single radar contact appeared on the screens of an American surveillance aircraft. At first, it looked insignificant, just another small object drifting across the water. But within seconds, the picture changed. Then another contact appeared, and another. Within 2 minutes, the radar display was crowded with dozens of fast-moving signatures, all heading toward the same target. A massive oil tanker carrying billions of dollars worth of fuel through one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. What began as a routine transit through the Gulf was suddenly turning into something far more dangerous. The tanker, escorted by coalition naval forces, was moving through a corridor of international shipping routes that handle nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply. Any disruption here would ripple through global markets within hours. Prices would surge. Insurance costs would skyrocket. Governments would scramble to secure alternative routes. For years, analysts had warned that the Persian Gulf was one of the most fragile choke points in the global energy system. Now that warning was about to be tested. Moments earlier, hundreds of kilometers away along a quiet stretch of coastline, Iranian operators had initiated what they believed would be a perfect asymmetric strike. Instead of relying on a handful of expensive missiles, they deployed a swarm. Dozens of small attack drones launched almost simultaneously, flying low over the water to avoid early detection. Alongside them raced fast patrol boats armed with rockets and electronic jammers designed to confuse radar and communications. The concept was simple: overwhelm the defenders. Each drone cost only a fraction of the missiles required to shoot it down. If enough of them reached the tanker, even a single explosion could ignite a catastrophic chain reaction. Fire aboard a fully loaded supertanker could burn for days, turning the vessel into a drifting inferno visible from space. In strategic terms, it would be a psychological victory far greater than the cost of the attack. But the attackers did not know that the entire region was being watched from above. Circling high over the Gulf was an American E-2D Hawkeye airborne radar aircraft, its rotating sensor dome quietly scanning hundreds of miles of airspace and sea lanes. What the Iranian planners assumed would be a sudden surprise had already been detected. Within seconds, the radar crew began transmitting precise coordinates to a nearby U.S. Navy destroyer equipped with the Aegis combat system. Deep inside the ship's combat information center, officers watched the swarm form on their tactical displays like a spreading storm front. Yet another problem quickly became clear. The incoming drones were cheap. The interceptors designed to destroy them were not. Every missile fired from the destroyer would cost millions of dollars. The attackers were betting that the defenders would hesitate, forced into a financial trap where defending the tanker might cost more than losing it. For a few tense moments, the destroyer held its fire. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of launching a volley of expensive interceptors, American commanders activated a response that had been quietly tested but rarely seen in combat. Helicopters lifted off from the deck, laser designators flickered to life, and a new kind of guided rocket system prepared to rewrite the rules of the engagement. What followed over the waters of the Persian Gulf would become a lesson in modern warfare, one where technology, economics, and timing mattered just as much as firepower. And for the swarm racing toward the tanker, the next 90 seconds would decide everything. At 1400 local time, the Persian Gulf looked deceptively calm. The sea was flat, the horizon blurred by heat and humidity, and dozens of commercial ships were moving through one of the busiest energy corridors in the world. Among them was a massive oil tanker sailing under the protection of coalition naval forces. The vessel carried crude oil valued at more than $2 billion, enough fuel to supply several major cities for weeks. To the crew, it was another routine passage through waters that had become tense but predictable over the past decade. But far above the tanker, nearly 9 kilometers in the sky, a different kind of watch was underway. An American airborne early warning aircraft, the E-2D Hawkeye, was circling slowly over the Gulf. The aircraft's distinctive radar dome rotated steadily, scanning hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The Hawkeye had been designed precisely for moments like this. to detect threats long before ships or ground radars could see them. Its advanced radar system could track hundreds of objects simultaneously, from large aircraft to small, low-flying drones barely larger than a motorcycle. For most of the afternoon, the radar picture looked normal. Cargo ships, patrol vessels, the occasional helicopter moving between ships. Nothing unusual. Then, at exactly 14:03, one of the radar operators noticed a faint signal emerging near the Iranian coastline. At first, it appeared to be interference, just a small flicker on the screen. But the contact stabilized, moving slowly out over the water. 30 seconds later, another signal appeared, then another. Within 2 minutes, the radar display showed more than a dozen small objects flying low above the surface of the Gulf. Their altitude was extremely low, sometimes just a few dozen meters above the water. That alone raised concern. Commercial drones rarely flew that low over open sea, and military aircraft almost never approached shipping lanes in such a pattern. The radar operator immediately alerted the mission commander. As the aircraft's computers refined the tracks, the pattern became unmistakable. These were not random objects. They were forming a coordinated formation, converging toward the same shipping corridor where the oil tanker was currently passing. A quick analysis suggested they were likely attack drones, similar to the Iranian Shahed series unmanned systems. These drones are known for their long range and relatively simple construction. Compared to sophisticated cruise missiles, they are cheap, but in large numbers they can pose a serious threat, especially to slow-moving targets like ships. The Hawkeye crew began transmitting data instantly through secure tactical networks. Coordinates, speed, altitude, trajectory. Every few seconds, the information updated and flowed directly to nearby coalition ships. One of those ships, the U.S. Navy destroyer USS McFall, was already operating less than 40 nautical miles from the tanker. Inside the destroyer's Combat Information Center, the atmosphere shifted almost immediately. The incoming radar tracks appeared on the ship's Aegis combat system displays, forming a spreading cluster of targets approaching from the northeast. Analysts quickly estimated the group might consist of more than 30 drones, though some tracks were still merging and separating as the radar refined its picture. At the same time, electronic intelligence operators aboard the Hawkeye detected something else. Short bursts of radio transmissions coming from the Iranian coast. The signals were unencrypted and lasted only seconds at a time, but they strongly suggested remote guidance commands being transmitted to the drones. Meanwhile, the tanker itself had no idea what was unfolding dozens of kilometers away. On its bridge, the crew continued routine operations, maintaining course and speed as they moved through the shipping lane. The captain had received a general advisory earlier that day about increased regional drone activity, but such warnings had become almost routine in recent years. Back in the sky, the Hawkeye's radar suddenly updated again. The swarm had grown. New contacts appeared behind the first wave, bringing the estimated total to more than 30 small drones flying in loose formation. Their speed suggested they would reach the tanker's vicinity in less than 15 minutes. If even one drone carried an explosive payload and struck the vessel near its fuel storage sections, the result could be catastrophic. Some analysts later calculated that a fire aboard a fully loaded tanker of that size could burn for nearly a week. Within seconds, the Hawkeye transmitted a priority alert. The swarm had been confirmed, and the countdown to interception had begun. Hundreds of kilometers away from the shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf, the operation had already begun long before the first drone appeared on American radar. Along a stretch of rugged Iranian coastline, hidden among warehouses and temporary hangars near a small military harbor, a group of operators had been preparing for what they believed would become a defining demonstration of asymmetric warfare. For years, Iranian military planners had studied the problem of confronting a technologically superior navy. The United States and its allies possessed advanced destroyers, powerful radar networks, and some of the most expensive interceptor missiles ever developed. Direct confrontation with such systems would be extremely costly. Instead, Iranian strategists focused on a different approach. Overwhelm the defenses with quantity rather than sophistication. The concept had already been discussed in military journals and war games. If a defender spends millions of dollars to shoot down objects that cost only thousands, the economic balance slowly shifts. Eventually, the defender faces a difficult question. How many expensive interceptors can be used against cheap drones before the cost becomes unsustainable? Inside one of the coastal facilities, technicians began preparing dozens of unmanned aerial vehicles resembling the Shahed series drones that have appeared in several conflicts over the past decade. These drones are relatively simple compared to advanced cruise missiles. Many of their components can be manufactured quickly, and their navigation systems rely on satellite guidance combined with pre-programmed routes. Their range can exceed 1,000 kilometers, depending on configuration. The drones selected for this operation were modified slightly for maritime use. Their guidance systems were calibrated to recognize large radar signatures associated with tankers and cargo vessels. According to intelligence assessments later gathered by Western analysts, some of the drones carried small explosive warheads designed to ignite fuel storage areas or damage navigation equipment on ships. Shortly before launch, operators began uploading flight paths into portable control terminals. Each drone would initially follow a separate route, flying low above the water to minimize detection. Several minutes later, they would converge into a loose swarm formation and approach the designated shipping corridor simultaneously. Nearby, several fast attack boats known as Boghammer-style patrol craft prepared to leave the harbor as well. These small vessels are capable of high speeds and are commonly used by Iranian naval forces for rapid maneuvering in the Gulf. Their role in the operation was not to attack the tanker directly, but to create confusion, broadcasting radio signals, deploying small radar reflectors, and potentially drawing the attention of defending ships. Just after 13:45 local time, the launch sequence began. One by one, the drones were rolled onto simple launch rails positioned near the shoreline. Solid fuel boosters ignited, sending each drone accelerating forward before its small engine stabilized into a steady, buzzing flight. Within minutes, the sky above the coast filled with the distant mechanical hum of multiple aircraft climbing to their programmed altitude. Some operators later described the moment as strangely quiet once the launches were complete. The drones quickly disappeared toward the open water, leaving only faint white trails that dissolved in the humid air. From the command shelter overlooking the launch site, a senior officer monitored their progress on a portable tracking display. The drone's signals appeared as small blinking dots slowly spreading across the map of the Gulf. Their routes had been designed carefully so that they would approach the target area from slightly different directions, making it harder for defending radar systems to predict the final attack vector. The officer believed the plan had a strong chance of success. Intelligence reports had suggested that U.S. naval forces often relied on expensive interceptor missiles, such as the RIM-162 ESSM, to destroy incoming threats. Each missile cost millions of dollars. Even a limited swarm could force defenders to spend enormous resources. What the planners could not see, however, was the aircraft already circling high above the Gulf. They assumed the drones would remain undetected until they were much closer to the shipping lanes. In reality, modern airborne radar systems can track small objects even when flying close to the surface, especially when dozens of them appear at once. As the swarm moved farther from the Iranian coastline, the drones gradually aligned with their programmed convergence point. Their engines maintained a steady speed of roughly 180 kilometers per hour. At that pace, they would reach the target corridor within minutes. Inside the coastal command shelter, the blinking dots continued advancing across the screen. The operators believed the difficult part of the mission was already over. In truth, the most dangerous phase was just beginning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the destroyer USS McFall, the atmosphere changed from routine monitoring to controlled urgency in a matter of seconds. The large tactical displays covering the walls now showed the same cluster of moving contacts that had been detected earlier by airborne surveillance. Each symbol represented a potential attack drone moving toward the shipping corridor. The system automatically calculated speed, altitude, and estimated intercept points. What had looked like scattered signals minutes earlier now clearly formed a coordinated swarm. The Aegis combat system aboard the destroyer was designed for exactly this kind of scenario. It integrates radar tracking, weapons control, and threat analysis into a single digital network capable of coordinating dozens of simultaneous engagements. As the data from airborne radar continued to stream into the ship's network, the system began assigning threat levels to each incoming track. Some drones appeared slightly ahead of the main group, while others followed behind, suggesting a layered approach designed to complicate defensive timing. Within moments, the ship's commanding officer, standing behind the rows of operators, faced a strategic dilemma that modern naval planners had been discussing for years. The destroyer carried powerful interceptor missiles, capable of destroying incoming threats far beyond visual range. Systems such as the RIM-162 evolved Sea Sparrow missile were designed to intercept aircraft and anti-ship missiles traveling at high speeds. They were extremely effective, but they were also extremely expensive. Firing dozens of them against small, relatively cheap drones would quickly drain the ship's missile inventory. In a prolonged confrontation, that imbalance could become dangerous. The economic logic of the swarm attack was suddenly very clear. One analyst in the combat center quietly summarized the situation. Even a conservative estimate suggested the incoming drones might cost only tens of thousands of dollars each. The interceptors required to destroy them cost millions. If the defenders reacted in the most obvious way, they would be playing exactly the game the attackers intended. For nearly a minute, the destroyer held its fire while officers evaluated alternatives. The Aegis system continued tracking the targets, projecting their future positions across the digital map. The drones were still several minutes away from the tanker, but the window for action was shrinking quickly. If they crossed a certain distance threshold, the time available for interception would drop dramatically. Meanwhile, the drones themselves continued flying steadily across the Gulf, their engines producing a constant mechanical buzz, barely audible above the water. From a distance, they appeared almost harmless, resembling small hobby aircraft. But their collective approach made them far more dangerous than any single drone could be. In the destroyer's operations room, another option was already being prepared. On the flight deck, two MH-60R Seahawk helicopters were starting their engines. These helicopters are commonly deployed aboard U.S. Navy destroyers and frigates for reconnaissance, anti-submarine warfare, and maritime security missions. But they can also carry a variety of precision weapons designed for engaging smaller targets. Over the past several years, the U.S. military had quietly integrated a relatively inexpensive system known as APKWS, the Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. Instead of launching large guided missiles, APKWS converts standard Hydra 70 rockets into precision weapons by adding a laser guidance kit. The result is a lightweight rocket that can accurately strike small targets while costing only a fraction of traditional interceptors. In many ways, it represented the exact opposite philosophy of the swarm attack. Rather than relying on expensive missiles, it used simple rockets upgraded with modern guidance technology. Within minutes, the helicopters lifted off from the destroyer's deck, their rotors slicing through the humid Gulf air. As they climbed, targeting data from the ship's sensors flowed directly into their onboard systems. The pilots could already see the swarm forming ahead on their displays. From the air, the approaching drones looked like scattered dots skimming low over the water. Some analysts later compared the sight to a flock of mechanical birds spreading across the surface of the sea. The lead helicopter moved into position first. A crew member in the rear cabin activated a laser designator, a device capable of illuminating a target with an invisible beam that guided incoming rockets. Because the drones were small and moving quickly, the crew had to work carefully to maintain a stable track. The first APKWS rocket launched seconds later. Unlike large interceptor missiles, the rocket produced only a brief flash as it left the launcher. For a moment, it flew unguided. Then its sensors detected the reflected laser energy and adjusted course automatically. Observers on the helicopter watched as the rocket curved slightly in flight before striking the first drone. The explosion was small but precise. Debris scattered across the surface of the water. Almost immediately, another rocket followed. Within the next minute, both helicopters began firing in quick succession. targeting the leading drones in the formation. The goal was not simply to destroy individual aircraft, but to break the swarm's coordination. Once the formation began to fragment, the remaining drones would become easier targets for other defensive systems. Back aboard the destroyer, operators watched the results appear on their tactical displays. One by one, the symbols representing incoming drones began disappearing as they were destroyed, yet several drones continued advancing. At that point, the ship's defensive systems joined the engagement. The destroyer activated its close-in weapon system, commonly known as the phalanx. This system uses a radar-guided Gatling gun capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute, creating a dense wall of projectiles designed to intercept threats that slip through outer defenses. As the first surviving drones approached the outer defensive perimeter, the phalanx system automatically tracked and engaged them. Streams of tracer rounds arced into the sky, tearing through the incoming targets before they could reach the tanker's position. At nearly the same time, another layer of American air power appeared in the region. A stealth fighter operating nearby, an F-35A Lightning II, had already been alerted by the earlier radar detection. Although the drones were its primary concern, the aircraft's sensors also detected something else in the distance: an Iranian fighter aircraft briefly approaching the area before turning away. The F-35's advanced infrared tracking system locked onto the heat signature of the aircraft's engines even before it came within visual range. For several tense seconds, the two aircraft moved toward one another on parallel paths. According to later reports, the Iranian pilot quickly realized he had been detected and changed course, retreating back toward national airspace rather than risking direct confrontation. By the time the last drone disappeared from the destroyer's display screens, the swarm had been effectively neutralized. Fragments of damaged drones floated across the water, and the tanker continued its journey without sustaining any significant damage. The engagement had lasted less than 20 minutes from the moment the swarm was first confirmed. In the aftermath, military analysts would study the encounter carefully. The event demonstrated a growing reality of modern warfare. Success was no longer determined only by who possessed the most powerful weapons, but by who could adapt faster to new tactics and economic pressures. What had begun as a calculated attempt to exploit the cost imbalance between cheap drones and expensive missiles had instead revealed a different equation, one where precision, flexibility, and innovation could shift the balance back in seconds. Long after the last drone had been destroyed and the tanker continued safely along its route, the real consequences of the encounter were only beginning to unfold. Modern military operations rarely end when the shooting stops. In many cases, the most valuable results come from what is learned afterward. Across multiple American command centers, the data from the engagement was already being analyzed. Every radar track, every radio signal, every fragment of electronic transmission captured during the incident was recorded and transmitted to intelligence teams. Aircraft, ships, and satellites operating in the region had gathered enormous amounts of information during those few tense minutes. One of the most important sources of intelligence came from the airborne surveillance aircraft that had initially detected the drone swarm. During the entire engagement, its systems had been quietly recording radio frequencies used by the drones and their controllers. Some of the transmissions appeared to be poorly encrypted or repeated across multiple channels. That alone provided analysts with an opportunity. Signals intelligence specialists began isolating patterns in the communications. The drones appeared to transmit telemetry data, small bursts of information about their speed, direction, and engine status. Even partial fragments of these signals could reveal valuable details about the guidance software and control architecture used in the system. Understanding those patterns could allow future electronic warfare systems to interfere with similar drones more effectively. At the same time, reconnaissance satellites were tasked to observe several suspected launch areas along the Iranian coastline. High-resolution images began arriving within hours. Analysts compared the images with the flight paths that had been reconstructed from radar data earlier. Several locations showed signs of recent activity: temporary launch rails, vehicle tracks in the sand, and small mobile control units that had likely been used during the operation. In